Welcome, Clean Titans community. Today, we have an extraordinary guest joining us, a true titan in the world of journalism and environmental discourse, Michael Grunwald. Michael, an award-winning author and journalist for outlets like the New York Times and Canary Media, and co-host of the ClimateCrisis podcast, is here to discuss his groundbreaking new book, We're Eating the Earth: The Race to Fix Our Food Systems and Save Our Climate. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Michael, your book's title, We Are Eating the Earth, is incredibly evocative. Many in the climate conversation focus heavily on fossil fuels, but your book argues that agriculture and our food systems are equally, if not more critical. Can you explain the core premise of We Are Eating the Earth and why you believe land use rather than just carbon emissions from food is the overlooked third rail of the climate crisis?
Sure. Well, really, agriculture is eating the earth. 2 of every 5 acres of habitable land on this planet are now cropped or grazed. Contrast, only about 1 of every 100 acres are cities or suburbs. Really, we've transformed this natural planet into an agricultural planet. It's continuing. We're on track to deforest another 12 Californias worth of land by 2050. We're currently losing about a soccer field worth of tropical forest every 6 seconds. And so, yes, as you suggest, fossil fuels are a very big deal, about 2/3 of the problem, climate. Food is a big problem too. And it's partly the tractors with their carbon emissions and the cows with their burping and farting methane and the fertilizer with their nitrous oxide. But it's mainly deforestation and wetland drainage, and the destruction of nature is basically sending all of that carbon that was stored in vegetation up into the sky. And it's really eliminating its ability to absorb carbon that right now our forests are soaking up 1/4 of our emissions. So I always say it's trying to decarbonize the planet while you're continuing to vaporize trees. It's like trying to clean up your house while you destroy your vacuum cleaner in the living room, right? You're making a mess, but you're also crippling your ability to clean up the mess.
You mentioned that 2 of every 5 acres of this planet are used for food. For our audience, can you break down what that truly means in terms of environmental impact beyond just carbon, thinking about water diversity and deforestation?
Sure. And agriculture is the leading driver of biodiversity loss because it's the leading driver of deforestation and wetland drainage. And basically, it's getting rid of all the habitats and ecosystems where critters live. That's not good. It's also a massive driver of water pollution, right? We've got a dead zone the size of Connecticut in the Gulf of Mexico that's created by fertilizers running off the farms in the Mississippi Valley. You've got algal blooms in the Great Lakes or the Chesapeake Bay. You have water shortages, right? Agriculture uses 70% of the Earth's fresh water. So really, agriculture has always made a mess. It's making more of a mess than ever. And it's on track to make an even bigger mess in the coming decades.
You make a provocative case that abandoning intensive agriculture in favor of romanticized low-yield farming could be catastrophic for both climate and biodiversity. This challenges many common narratives. Can you explain your perspective on industrial agriculture's role, both its problems and its surprising efficiencies in feeding a growing planet without destroying more natural land?
Well, no, you're right. A lot of people get angry at me because they hate industrial agriculture. And I get it, right? It animals badly, treats people badly, often has noxious politics, right? These agribusinesses who are lobbying against environmental regulation and climate action use too many antibiotics, which creates a public health crisis, kinds of bad stuff with factory farms. But one thing factories do well is manufacture a lot of cheap commodities. And it turns out that that is agriculture's biggest job over the next couple decades. We're going to need to make about 50% more calories, and we have to do it without using more land for agriculture. And so, again, I don't say that we necessarily need to have all industrial agriculture, but we do need high yield agriculture because make more food per acre, you need fewer acres to make food. But the reverse is also true. And some of these kind of nice, twee, organic, kinder and gentler approaches that Michael Pollan has made very popular and hear a lot of support on the left and the right, Kennedy and Joe Rogan, as well as Al Gore, talking about these kind of ecology regenerative principles. You're making less food, you're going to need more land. And that's really the problem, because that is the transformation of these rustic bucolic pollen farms into industrial farms does create some environmental cost, but the real cost is the transformation of nature into the farms in the first place. When you lose the carbon, that's when you lose the biodiversity. And we need to stop doing that.
What's the grand bargain? You suggest we need a strike. You suggest we need to strike with industrial agriculture to make it less destructive without sacrificing the yields.
Yeah, I think the idea that we're just going to get rid of industrial agriculture, even if it was desirable, is pretty crazy unrealistic, right? In the United States, 99% of our meat is factory farmed, and going to stop tomorrow. So what I suggest is that instead of these unrealistic ideas about trying to get rid of it, we should try to reform it. And essentially, it's when I talk about a grand bargain, like around the world, $600 billion worth of annual subsidies for agriculture, and most of it is just handouts with attached. I'm essentially saying like, hey, let's try to attach some environmental strings. So where you're going to keep getting your money, and we're going to try to help you make even more food, but we're going to ask you to make less mess.
Less wasteful.
Yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of sort of win-win solutions, right? Where right now half of all fertilizer is wasted, and that's in the form of nitrous oxide emissions in the air or nitrate pollution in the water. But it's like farmers like wasting nitrogen, pay for that nitrogen. So
Yes.
that you can have, technological, right, about a company called Pivot Bio that's gene editing microbes to essentially use as biological fertilizer. The microbes then kind of snatch nitrogen out of the air and feed it to crops, and they replace chemical fertilizer. And that's something that government should be helping farmers to adopt. And at the same time, government should be insisting that farmers, emit oxide. So again, there's sort of a kind of combination of carrots and sticks.
I was in China. They're doing precision farming with drones, with GPS and 5G connected drones, only spraying where they need to as much fertilizer, herbicide, and pesticides as they need. So substantially decreasing that wastage.
Exactly. I think that kind of precision ag where you see these kind of that only drop fertilizer where it's needed. I really think that's a part of the future in rich countries. And then part of the challenge will be getting them to developing countries.
Well, here they're not even using a tractor, so they're not messing up, they're not messing up the soil and, that agriculture runoff because you're just flying over.
Oh, even better. Yeah, exactly. These are all kinds of precision, the robotics, a lot of problems, particularly as it's hotter and field work becomes more dangerous. Reducing that really, back while also, providing ways of harvesting and weeding and fertilizing all of agricultural activities.
Delves into areas like corn ethanol and biomass, arguing they often have hidden environmental costs. You also critically examine certain claims around regenerative agriculture as a climate solution. Could you elaborate on these findings and perhaps shed light on why some widely accepted green practices might not be as beneficial as they seem?
Well, the basic problem, again, is land use, right? All of these studies of biofuels, that the initial ones a couple decades ago that said that they were much better for the climate than gasoline, they'd ignored the problem of essentially induced deforestation. The idea that if you grow fuel instead of food, you're going to need to grow more food somewhere else. And it's probably not going to be a parking lot. It's going to be a wetland or a forest that was storing a lot of carbon, and you're going to lose the carbon. And that actually makes biofuels like corn ethanol twice as bad as gasoline. I think there's been similar problems with regenerative agriculture, where people look at the land where the regenerative agriculture is happening and they say, oh, look, there's more biodiversity. It's better for the microbiome. There's less soil erosion. There's more water retention. It's better for the soil. And those are all good things. But they're forgetting that agriculture has impacts outside that particular acre. And if that acre is producing less food, you're going to need more acres to produce food. And so again, even if regenerative agriculture is better for that particular acre, it's going to create deforestation and wetlands drainage on other acres. And overall, that's worse for the climate and for the environment. So I think that regenerative agriculture generally, a lot of people who love it. There are a lot of nice things about it. Some of its practices, and I went down to Brazil and saw how regenerative practices were actually promoting really excellent yields on ranches where they were using rotational grazing, doing lots of things that Michael Pollan would love. But again, the yields have to be okay, because if you're losing yield, you're losing land. And again, the eating of the earth is really at the heart of so many of these environmental and climate problems that I write about.
So we really need to eliminate subsidies on ethanol and stop lowering the price at the pump of ethanol artificially?
Oh, ethanol is ridiculous. Really, what it mostly does, it's mostly, certainly in the United States, we have ethanol mandates. And what that does is increase the price of corn and vegetable oil, food prices as well. It is not something we want to be doing. We want food to be affordable and accessible. And we want it to be as well, but just not an efficient way to make energy.
I read somewhere that 8 gallons of ethanol with like 7 gallons of fossil fuels going into making that. So net benefit is almost negligible.
Oh yeah, and that's not including the land use, right? That's incredibly inefficient. An example I always use is that the energy you get from growing an acre of solar panels, right? Using an acre and just putting solar panels on it, about what you get from 100 acres of growing corn from ethanol. And if you use that solar power to move an electric car, it will go about 250 times as far as that internal combustion engine powered car will run on ethanol.
Wow, that is remarkable. My follow-up question was going to be, what surprised you the most during your research? I guess that would be one thing.
I had read Michael Pollan, so I was like to think that this was something that people who cared about the environment should care about these kind of forms of farming. And I'd heard a lot of this notion that it needs to stop being part of the problem and instead be part of the solution. But really, I started doing my research. I realized that it's made a mess since it was invented 10 to 12,000 years ago. If you look at the ancient pollen samples and the ice cores, it was early agriculture was creating noticeable global warming, like that you could measure. And in fact, this is kind of macabre, but great dying of indigenous people in the Americas after European contact in the 1500s, genocide and those being wiped out from diseases created measurable global cooling because they were some very sophisticated farmers. And a lot of their farms, after they were wiped out, basically reverted back to nature. And those trees and shrubs soaked up enough carbon to measurably cool the planet.
Your recent article about barbecuing sparked a lot of discussion, stating when you eat a burger, you're not just eating a cow, you're eating macaws and the rest of the cast of Rio. You're eating the Amazon. This is a powerful image for our Clean Titans audience, many of whom are looking for actionable solutions. What is the real environmental cost of meat, and how does it specifically relate to land use and deforestation?
Well, eating meat is worse than eating plants for the climate and the planet. It's just a more efficient nutrition delivery than basically laundering the plants through an animal, right? It takes about 8 calories of feed for a chicken to produce 1 calorie of meat, because all those calories are going to support feathers and clucking and pooping and all kind of stuff that doesn't produce meat. Then beef and other ruminants are way worse, like times worse than chicken or pork, partly because of their burping and farting methane that everybody talks about, partly because of their manure, but mainly because they use so much more land, just extraordinarily inefficient converters of their feed into our food. And so that means that if you do want to do something with your diet to try to help the climate, by far the biggest thing you can do is eat less beef. I can give you a list of 30 things and they could all help a little, but eating less beef helps so much more. It really overwhelms everything else. Then number 2 would be waste less food, because we also, the farmland and fertilizer and water that we use to grow wasted food. Really, beef and other ruminants are the baddie. And in fact, I've cut out beef and lamb from my diet. And while it's not as good as going vegan, that's the best diet for the planet, about as good as going vegetarian, because vegetarians tend to eat more dairy, and cattle are really the problem. Dairy isn't as bad as beef because cows produce milk several times a day, and in their lifetime, they only produce beef once. But again, you can avoid beef and lamb, goats, really the big part of the problem.
So the ancient Indians had figured this out. They need beef.
It's true. They have the most dairy of anywhere in the world, though. So their sacred cows some problems as well.
You mentioned diet is like religion. We all find the level of hypocrisy we can live with. Perfect isn't usually on the menu. Better is better than worse. Most of us will never go vegan, but for all of us, eating less beef would be better. What are some practical better steps individuals can take to reduce their food's climate footprint without needing to go fully vegan?
Again, eat less beef, waste less food. Those are really 2 big ones. I can give you a list of other things, but I feel like number 3 would be eat even less beef. You just think beef is such an outsized part of the problem, and 350 million tons of every year. And we use half of our agricultural land for beef that provides about 3% of our calories. We have about 3 burgers a week, the average American. If it was only 2 burgers a week, we would save a landmass the size of Massachusetts every year. So if you want to do something, that's the thing to do.
What about Impossible or Beyond burgers?
Yeah, no, they about 90% less land and create about 90% fewer emissions. Because again, they're in plants directly instead of running it through the cow. It is particularly for Beyond, it's gone from $250 a share to $2 a share, is that people didn't like it. It's better than the old hockey puck veggie burgers, but it's not as good as beef. Beef is pretty delicious, and our ancestors started eating it 2 million years ago. And I've stopped eating beef because I climate, but most people aren't like that. They want a product that tastes good and costs less. And right now, that product is beef, not the beef alternatives.
And cutting out red meat is better for your health, so you save money on your medical bills too.
That's true. I mean, and the sort of fake meat has gotten a lot of criticism because it's like processed food. Honestly, what goes on inside a cow's stomach is a process too. And generally, it looks like plant-based burgers are at least as healthy as beef, probably a little healthier. I have a lot of confidence that people will eat them once they get, but they're not there yet.
Right. And those burgers, the science keeps improving and they keep getting better. The
That's
plant-based burgers.
exactly right. I mean, the pretty mature technology. While there are smart technologists working on, plant and cultivated meat made from animal cells and mycelium-based meat made from fungi, that a lot of confidence that making it better and cheaper and healthier. But that's be the test. Just like electric vehicles, nobody bought because they were like just good for the planet. People bought them because they were fun and cool and competitively. And that's what needs to happen with meat. It's already happening with nuggets. Plant-based nuggets in blind taste tests, they beat chicken nuggets or whatever the hell is in those chicken nuggets. I mean, God, but that, it's sort of getting close. Impossible is definitely the closest, but certainly some other whole cuts are nowhere near there yet.
I try to substitute with Impossible Burger whenever I can.
Yeah, that's great. Like I had an Impossible sausage for the breakfast sandwich at Starbucks this morning for breakfast, and it was great. I think just as good as sausage.
Can you elaborate on the potential of these elk proteins and other high-tech food fixes like gene-edited crops to transform our food system and reduce our planetary footprint? What are the biggest hurdle for these technologies, and where do you see the most promising breakthroughs?
Gosh, well, I saw so many exciting technologies, though they're all really early stage. I saw alternative fertilizers that use gene-edited microbes to take nitrogen out of the air and feed it to crops so you don't have to use chemicals. I saw biopesticides made with the mRNA technology behind the COVID vaccines that are literally constipating potato beetles to death. I saw at the University of Illinois, there are these scientists who are literally reinventing photosynthesis. They're using artificial intelligence and gene editing, and they're essentially finding the inefficiencies and editing them out, which is incredibly exciting. Look, none of these are really reaching scale yet. And so that's just like on the energy side, how 20 years ago, solar and wind and electric vehicles had no traction whatsoever. That's where these food solutions and ag solutions are today. What helped on the energy side was a lot of government investment in research and development, and then government investment in deployment of the stuff that worked. And we're not really seeing much of that yet on the food side, a little bit in sort of early stages. But of course, in the United States, we're going the opposite direction now. We're taking away the government subsidies for promising energy solutions.
For investors, what areas within elk proteins or sustainable agriculture technology do you see as ripe for innovation and investment right now?
Oh, that's a great question. I do think investors seem to, and again, no offense, but there does seem to be a little bit of a herd mentality, right? Where in 2019, everybody was going crazy over alt proteins. I went to a big conference and I thought I was going to accidentally raise a Series A round in the drinks line. I was just absolutely convinced that this stuff was the next big thing. It was going to replace animal meat within a decade or two. Everybody wanted in. And now, of course, nobody will touch this stuff. Investment freeze, not just for plant-based meat, where you've seen Beyond price went from $250 to $2 a share, so nobody else wants in anymore. Also, that's stink has gotten onto cultivated meat, which hasn't even really made it to market, but they've lost all their investors, have run for the hills with the mycelium-based meat. And it hasn't worked out yet, but I feel like there's still a lot of promise there, particularly like the cultivated side. I don't even understand the doom and gloom. It seems to be doing pretty well behind the scenes. I do think the kind of things that will free up land and that can be compensated in these carbon markets, I think are very exciting. The idea that there's some guy in Nepal who's trying to figure out a way to chemically treat rice straw so that it can be used as a really high quality animal feed, I mean, potentially free up millions of acres of land that we use to grow animal feed. Those, I think, will be exciting to monetize. Some of those alternative fertilizers and pesticides and feed additives that will help cattle burp less methane. You see a price on methane or regulations of methane, which you're starting to see in Europe. I think those will be really investments because they seem to work. They just haven't gotten to scale. And that's where investment in kind of biological nitrification inhibition, which makes me a big hit at parties. But I do think like they're going to discover some of this stuff. They're going to see that there's a market for it once it's in farmers' interest to essentially take better care of the environment. And I think they're the big future.
Seaweed, I saw, can significantly decrease the amount of methane produced by cows.
Yeah, I went and visited the guy was doing those studies at Al Davis. It's very exciting, and you're actually starting to see like the United States and many other countries have approved a chemical feed additive that is maybe reducing methane emissions 30%. There's that these seaweeds could someday maybe as much as 80%. But again, somebody's got to figure out ways to grow the seaweed, and then somebody's got to commercialize it, and somebody's got to have a market. So these things are, that's the theme that I bang my spoon in my high chair about over and over again, is that if this stuff were easy, somebody would have done it already.
What specific policies, subsidies, or incentives are most effective in encouraging more sustainable food production and consumption? Are there any international examples like Denmark or policies that offer a good roadmap?
Well, Denmark is really, they're like the model nation. I know they are in many ways. People always talk about that. And again, they're only 6 million people and it's a pretty rich country. So who knows if the rest of the world will be able to follow it. But I went in 2020 and we're starting to think about how can we, agricultural emissions, because they already really regulated their energy emissions. And they were, anyways, solved that problem, at least for Danes. So agriculture was looking like a bigger part of their problem. But didn't want to get rid of their industry because they were incredibly efficient pork and dairy producers. So it wouldn't have really made a lot of sense to just, shut it down so you have less emissions in Denmark, but then you just outsource it to the developing world where it would be done less efficiently and you'd have even more emissions. So what they did essentially was kind of things. They have a tax on agricultural emissions in the world, but also going to help farmers to adopt both yield enhancing efficiency solutions that will help them make even more food, but also climate solutions that will help them do it with less mess. So some of the things we've talked about, those crops and feed additives, that could be really exciting. At the same time, they're also going to rewild like acres of farmland to return it to nature.
Wow.
And going to be promoting plant-based eating throughout the country and these alternative proteins. So they're kind of doing all the things. And again, are we all going to do what Denmark is doing? I don't know, but it shows that it can be done.
I read somewhere their milk production is like 10 times more efficient than some developed countries.
Oh yeah, no, times as much. And as somebody I quoted said that it's like difference between putting 20 people on a bus or having 20 different cars. If you're getting 20 times as much milk production per cow, right? 20 times more cows in India to produce the amount of milk. And so this is again where, talk about industrial dairies, which, maybe aren't quite as happy and a lot of time milking, but produce a lot of milk without as many cows and without as much methane and without as much feed.
What are the primary political obstacles to implementing these necessary food system reforms? How do the groups you mentioned, big ag, big food, big dairy, versus climate and philanthropic players, shape this policy landscape?
Well, so much power everywhere. $600 billion worth of subsidies around the world every year. And you see in the United States where, they control farm subsidies, they control farm regulation or the lack of it. And so I don't downplay the impact of their political. I tell a lot of, funny or, haunting stories, how much power they have in the book. And so this is why I do think it's a little bit unrealistic to think that we're just going to kind of make ag food go away. I do think the danger, like you mentioned, philanthropies, they're all sort of joining hands. The Rockefeller Foundation, the Walton Foundation, they're calling $4 trillion global transition from industrial agriculture to regenerative agriculture. And again, I understand why those trillions of dollars will end up going to farmers and agribusinesses. But I think if it reduces yield, it's going to be devastating for the climate and the planet. So I think at the very least, we want the kind of marching in the right direction. And I do think, especially to the efficiency is the goal, you can get big ag to march in the right direction too, because to the extent that Cargill and JBS and Tyson and Smithfield, that they have an ideology, it's efficiency. They want to make more food with fewer resources and, fewer costs too. So again, this stuff is hard. Global policy is particularly, there is going to have to be some transfer from rich countries to poor countries with the right incentives and the right sticks as well as carrots. But again, we should throw up hands just because it's hard.
Yeah, if you can go big ag to produce fermented dairy products and cultured proteins, that would be awesome. That would significantly reduce
they have horrible margins, right? They're like the whole is like just moving massive amounts of product with very tiny margins. They'd love to get on cultivated meat. And in fact, they hope to be the biggest supplier to cultivated meat companies because they can get higher margins.
You've called for a global emphasis on produce and protect, where developing countries receive support to help their farmers make more food with less land. Can you paint a picture of what this global strategy looks like in practice?
Sure. I mean, they've tried it in Brazil, particularly in some Brazilian provinces, where they've essentially said, "Hey, we're gonna help those technologies we've discussed. We're gonna encourage them to more food and make the most of their existing land. We're gonna help with infrastructure, but they can't deforest. They can't use more land. And if the forests come down, then the money is going to be cut off. And in fact, in parts of Brazil, they actually cut off farm credit. So farmers actually had an incentive to spy on each other to make sure that nobody was deforesting, because then everybody would lose. And then the flip side was supposed to be a lot of support and help from the international community to help them produce. And basically the international community didn't keep its promises and didn't send the money. And so they stopped doing it, and it was kind of a political and environmental disaster. So I think, again, there needs to be an international commitment. We're talking about not just billions of dollars, but over decades, hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to have to be transferred to these developing countries and emerging agricultural superpowers. Because remember, in the United States, we act like, get all angry at Brazil and Indonesia for deforesting the Amazon and their tropical rainforest. But like we already did that in the 19th century, right? I mean, it was 85% forest. And we don't like corn and soybean farmers are like us with deforestation, right? But they are in the same way that Brazilian farmers are. And so I do think that there has to be, if we want Brazilian farmers to stop cutting down the Amazon and the Cerrado, we have to make it worth their while. And that is in the international community's interest to do that.
How can consumers in developed nations contribute to this produce and protect philosophy through their choices and advocacy?
Well, that's hard, right? I make everybody to eat less meat, but of course, like people on Earth eat practically no meat. And then, really, we were talking about how the world can get better over the next few decades. I mean, changes in Africa, as well as China and India, that are going to lead to increased meat consumption in those countries because people will be getting richer. And the first thing humans tend to do when they stop being poor is to start eating meat. So it would be a sign of good things happening. And look, in the United States, we still eat 4 times as much beef as the global average. So we've still got plenty of room to beef consumption before we start shaking our fingers at around the world. Now, obviously, it would be great if the leapfrog technologies we've seen with cell phones, where you didn't have to build in some of these development countries. It would be awesome if alternative proteins got that you could do that. At least the meat and dairy ecosystem. It would be great to to plant-based or cultivate, or at least a mix of cultivated or blended products that use less meat. But I guess I wouldn't say that the onus is on the developing countries to start.
Despite the challenging realities presented in your book, it ends on a hopeful note, admiring humanity's capacity for world-changing innovation. What gives you the most hope for our ability to fix our food systems and save our climate?
Well, I again think about how I was a policy reporter, and I wrote a lot about energy and climate. I didn't know anything about food, but I think about when I started writing about energy like 20 years, and there were no solutions. There was alternative to fossil fuels. It looked all coal all the way, and cars. And you see how far we've come. It's just, going to build a new power plant, and we're probably building a wind and solar plant. And it really does look like electric vehicles are the future of transportation. So when I look at the food system, where to take like a technology cultivated meat, in its entire history, there's only been $3 billion in investment and hardly any public investment. While solar power, in just the first quarter of this year, there was $250 billion of public and private investment. So I just think like humans are good at figuring out stuff like this. And I think the proper investment, these changes can be like this. Again, this is what and there really are a lot of smart people working on it. That does give, look, sometimes when about how much progress has been made so far, it's kind of this really sad, and why am I such a Debbie Downer book? But pretty solving problems when we set our mind to it. The reason I, wrote the book, try to convince people we need to set our mind to it.
What role do you see storytelling in journalism in accelerating this transition, particularly in making complex issues like land use compelling for a broader audience?
Well, we'll see, right? I did try, and I've been very gratified by the reviews of the book have all talked about how it's actually fun to read. You can actually to the beach. It's funny, jokes. I tried to feel like homework. And I do think that's important. And in the same way that alternative proteins have to taste good, I think science communication has to be easy to understand and hopefully even fun to understand. But then you can't force people. And that's, as we've seen in the United States, like their news, how they get their news, and they believe what they want to believe. I don't know. I was joking when I said we'll see, but that is really how I feel about it. I put the book out into the world. I hope people read it and learn something, and I hope it leads to change of individual behaviors and policies. But I don't know if I'd bet on it.
For our Clean Titans audience, entrepreneurs, scientists, and investors, what is one key takeaway or actionable insight you hope they gain from We're Eating the Earth that can guide their work and investments in the clean energy transition?
I think that land matters, that land is not free. If you're looking at a company or even an entire market that is not taking the cost of land and the opportunity cost of land into account, the long-term prospects of that market, I think, are not bright. Goes for regenerative ag, for biofuels, for power, the idea of burning wood for electricity. Just think goes for these carbon markets that essentially now, like you have a very highly productive ranch, you can probably make money in the carbon markets by turning it into an unproductive ranch. And that's crazy. And I think that can't hold. And so I imagine there have to be arbitrage opportunities for people who recognize that land matters and land has a cost.
Why didn't vertical urban farming work out? It seemed when it first arrived, it seemed like that would be the future, but it hasn't really worked out that way.
Well, it's an energy, right now it's an energy suck, and that's still a problem. But ultimately, I think it's just wouldn't write off the idea that the technology could get better and it might work for lettuce and strawberries and other margin products. Like it will work great for weed. I don't think it's going to work great for corn and soy and wheat and rice and meat and the food that really feeds the world. So I'm more down on it as I was down on it when everybody was as an investment opportunity, when all those companies were worth billions of dollars and I just didn't get it. Wouldn't say that necessarily moving forward. I don't know, but I am down on it as a way to save the world.
I know I went to I forget the name of the company in North New Jersey. I went to the
Aero
farm
farm.
11 years ago.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was really exciting. But Singapore is doing it
The
amazing.
CEO is now running an insect company.
Oh, okay. That's the area we didn't touch on.
It's
That's
not
a
doing very
fascinating
well
area.
either. So again, it's all going to be hard.
Well, Singapore is doing amazing things with vertical farming. They might come up with some solutions.
Well, places that don't have a lot of land tend to be innovative in these areas. Israel too.
Yeah, I think that these philanthropies and governments should just massively invest in R&D for food production, because that can just completely leapfrog into a future of abundance and low energy and zero land use and unlimited food for us.
From your lips to their ears.
Where can our audience find your book, connect with you, and learn more about your work?
Oh, thank you. Well, the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your local bookseller, I hope, anywhere you get it. I'm on Twitter, at Mike Grunwald, Blue Sky, also it's at Mike Grunwald. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm not hard to find. I do have a website that's michaelgrunwaldbooks.com. And I'm a contributing writer for the New York Times opinion page, so I'm going to keep writing there as well.
And your podcast.
Sorry?
Your podcast.
Podcast died, alas.
Oh, okay. The links to your social media in the description for the.
Well, I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
Michael, thank you so much for this incredibly insightful and vital conversation.
Thank you.
We are truly shifts the conversation around climate solutions in a profound way. Your work is a powerful contribution to understanding how we can build a more sustainable future. To our Clean Titans community, thank you for turning in this crucial discussion. We hope it sparks further thought and action in your own journey to be part of the change. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Clean Titans channel, and hit the notification bell for more exclusive interviews and inspiring stories. We'll see you next time.
All right.